Section 77 of the Divine Comedy by Dante Alighieri, translated by Courtney Langdon. This Librivox recording is in the public domain. Paradiso, Canto 10. The Fourth Heaven. The Sun. Intellectual Happiness. The Spirits of Theologians and Philosophers.
Looking upon his Son with all the love which both of them eternally breathe forth, the primal and unutterable power with so great order made whate'er revolves through mind or space, that none who look at it can ever be without a taste of him. Lift, therefore, reader, to the heavenly wheels thine eyes with me, directly to the region where one of their two motions strikes the other, and there begin to contemplate with love that master's art, who in himself so loves it, that never doth his eye abandon it. And now see how from thence the oblique ring, which bears the planets with it, branches off, to please the world which calls upon them. How, in case their path were not thus bent aside, in vain would be much virtue in the heavens, and dead well nigh all potencies down here. And how, if from the straight line more or less removed it swerved, much in the mundane order would lacking be below and up above. Now, reader, on thy bench remain, and what is here foretasted follow out in thought, if thou, ere weary, wouldst be very glad. Food have I set before thee, feed thou now thyself, because the theme, whose scribe I'm made, unto itself is resting all my care. The greatest of the ministers of nature, which with the power of heaven imprints the world, and with its light measures our time for us, joined with the section touched upon above, was circling now around the spiral rings, wherein it earlier shows itself each day. And I was in it, but was not aware of my ascent, except as one before a thought has come is conscious of its coming. 'Tis Beatrice, who thus from good to better conducts one with such swiftness that her act extendeth not through time. In its own self how bright must that have been, which in the sun, which I had entered, was not visible by colour, but by light. Though I on genius, practice, and art should call, I could not so describe it, that it e'er could be imagined. But it can be believed, and sight of it should be desired, and for such heights, if low be our imagination, is no wonder, for no eye ever reached beyond the sun. Such the fourth family here of that exalted Father, who ever states it by revealing how he breathes forth and how he generates. And Beatrice began,
give thanks unto the angel's Son, who of his grace hath raised thee up to this material one.
No mortal heart was ever so disposed to be devoted, and with all its pleasure give itself up to God, as I became at those last words of hers. Hence all my love set itself so on him, that Beatrice in my forgetting mind became eclipsed, and she disliked it not, but smiled at it, so that the splendour of her laughing eyes shared with more things my undivided mind. I many keen and dazzling splendours saw, who sweeter voiced than in appearance bright, made us a centre and themselves a crown. Latona's daughter we behold at times thus girded, when so pregnant is the air, that it retains the thread that forms her zone. Within the court of heaven, whence I return, are many jewels found, so fair and precious, that from the kingdom they may not be moved. And of these was the singing of those lights. Let him who doth not feather him to fly up there await the dumb for news from thence. And then, when singing thus, those burning suns had all around us whirled themselves 3 times, like stars that near unmoving poles revolve, ladies they seemed to me, who though not through with dancing, yet in silence stop a while, and list till they have caught the music's coming notes. In one I heard beginning,
Since the ray of grace, whereby true love is set on fire, and afterward, by dint of loving, grows and multiplies, is shining in thee so, that it conducts thee upward o'er the stairs which none without remounting e'er descends. He who thy thirst the wine within his flask refused would be no more at liberty than water is which falls not to the sea. Thou fain wouldst know what blooms this wreath enflowers itself withal, which, circling round her, woos the lady fair who makes thee strong for heaven. One of that holy flock's young lambs was I, which Dominic leads along the path whereon one thriveth well, if one go not astray. The nearest on my right here was my brother and teacher, he was Albert of Cologne, and Thomas of Aquinum I. If thus of all the other lights thou wouldst be sure, follow behind my speaking with thy face revolving upward round the blessed wreath. That other flaming issues from the smile of Gratian, who to both the courts of law was such a help that Paradise is pleased. The next, who at his side adorns our choir, that Peter was, who, like the needy widow, offered his treasure up to Holy Church. The fifth light, which is fairest in our midst, is with such love inspired that all the world down there is hungry to have news of it. In it is that great mind wherein was placed wisdom so deep that if the truth be true no second hath arisen to see so much. See next which that candle's light which saw most inwardly, when in the flesh below, the angels' nature and their ministry. In the next little light, that advocate of Christian times is smiling, of whose work in Latin Augustine availed himself. If now thy mind's eye thou art moving on, from light to light, behind my words of praise, thou now remainest thirsting for the eighth, because it sees all good things. There within that holy soul rejoices, which reveals the cheating world to one who hears him well. Down yonder in Schildaro lies the body, from which this soul was driven, and to this peace from martyrdom and banishment it came. Flaming beyond it, see the burning breath of Isidore, of Bede, and of Ricardo, who was in speculation more than man. And this, from whom thy glance returns to me, the light is of a spirit, unto whom in deep thoughts lost it seemed that death came slowly. This is the light eternal of Sigeri, who when he lectured in the street of straw, proved by his syllogisms displeasing truths.
Then like a clock which calls us at the hour, at which the bride of God awakes to sing her spouse a morning song, and win his love, and as one part or draws or drives the other, and sounds ting, ting with such delightful notes, that spirits well disposed are filled with love. Even so I saw that glorious circle move, and fuse its voices in a harmony and with a sweetness which can not be known, except where joy is self-externalized.
End of Paradiso Canto 10. Section 78 of the Divine Comedy by Dante Alighieri, translated by Courtney Langdon. This Librivox recording is in the public domain. Paradiso, Canto 11. The Fourth Heaven. The Sun. Intellectual Happiness. The Spirits of Theologians and Philosophers. St. Francis.
O foolish care of mortal men, how full of fallacies the syllogisms, which cause thee over another course to beat thy wings! One given to legal learning went his way, one medicine, the priesthood one pursued, and lordship one by force or sophistry. One practised theft, and public business one in the pleasures of the flesh involved was growing weary, one to idleness and ease was giving up his life, while I, from all these things set free, was up in heaven with Beatrice so gloriously received. When each had to the point returned again, where in the ring he was before, he stayed there, still as a candle in a candlestick. And I within the light which had before addressed me, heard one smilingly begin, as more and more resplendent it became.
As with its radiance I am shining here, so I, by gazing at the eternal light, learn whence thou takest occasion for thy thoughts. In doubt, thou wouldst that I repeat, in words so clear and so distinct that they will suit thine understanding, that late speech of mine, wherein I said, whereon one thriveth well, and where I said, no second hath arisen. For clearly must one needs distinguish here the providence, which with that counsel rules the world, whereby, before it reach the bottom, every created sight is overcome, in order that the bride of him, who cried aloud, and spoused her with his blessed blood, might go toward her delight, safe in herself, and unto him more faithful too, ordained in her behalf 2 princes, who should serve as guides to her, on this side and on that. One, in his burning love, was all seraphic; the other, by his wisdom, was on earth a splendour of cherubic light. I'll speak of one of them, for both are spoken of, when one is praised, whichever one be taken, for to the same end were the deeds of both. Between Tupino and the stream that flows adown the hill which blessed Ubaldo chose, a lofty mountain's fertile slope impends, from which Perugia feels at Portesole both cold and heat, while, for their heavy yoke, behind it Gualdo and Nocera weep. Out of this hillside, where it breaketh most its steepness, to the world a son was born, as out of Ganges this one is at times. Therefore let him who talks about that place not say Ashesi, which were not enough, but Orient say, if he would rightly speak. Not distant from his rising was he yet, when he began to cause the world to feel somewhat encouraged by his wondrous virtue; for, still a youth, he strove against his father, for such a lady's sake, that unto her as unto death none opened pleasure's door; and then, before his church's legal court, and in his father's presence, joined himself to her, and ever after, day by day, loved her the more intensely. She, bereft of her first husband, slighted and scorned, remained unwooed 1100 years and more till that one came, nor aught availed to hear, that he, whom all the world was fearing, found her undaunted, with Amyclus by his voice, nor aught, her being so unmoved and firm, that even when Mary stayed beneath it, she went up with Christ upon the cross. But now, lest in my long talk I proceed too darkly, take Poverty and Francis as these lovers. Their concord and their joyful countenance caused wonder, love, and gentle looks to end in others' holy thoughts; and so much so that venerable Bernard was the first to bear his feet and run behind such peace, and, running, feel that he was slow of foot. O wealth unrealized! O fertile goodness! Egidio bears his feet, Sylvester his, behind the groom, so pleasing is the bride. That father then and master went his way with both his lady and that family, which now was girding on the humble cord, nor let base-heartedness weigh down his brow for being Peter Bernardone's son, nor yet for seeming so contemptible to others, but revealed his stern resolve to innocent with royal dignity, and won from him his order's primal seal, when Poverty's beloved followers had grown behind the man whose wondrous life would in the glory of heaven be better sung. The holy purpose of this head of flocks was through Honorius by the Holy Spirit crowned with a second crown. Thereafter, when by reason of his thirst for martyrdom, Christ and the rest, his followers, he had preached before the haughty Sultan, and on finding his folk too restive to conversion, not to stay in vain, returned to pick the fruit of Latin fields. Among the savage rocks which 'tween the Tiber and the Arno rise, he took from Christ himself the final seal, which on his limbs he bore for 2 whole years, when him it pleased, who granted him such weal, to draw him up to that reward which he, by making himself lowly, had deserved, to his own brethren, as to rightful heirs, he recommended his most precious Lady, and ordered them to love her faithfully. Then from her bosom his illustrious soul willed to depart, and to its realm returned, and for its body wished no other buyer. Think now what he was, who, as his companion, was worthy deemed to keep the bark of Peter true to its course when sailing on the deep. That was our patriarch. Thou hence canst see that he who follows him as he commands loadeth his vessel with good merchandise. And yet his flock, so greedy for new food, hath grown, that it can hardly fail to scatter through various wood and mountain pasture lands, and hence the more his sheep like vagabonds wander away and further go from him, emptier of milk do they regain the fold. Yet surely some there are, who, dreading harm, cling to their shepherd. But so few are these, that little cloth will furnish them with cows. If now my words have not been indistinct, and if thy hearing hath attentive been, and thou recall to mind what I have said, partly contented will thy wishes be, because thou'lt see the plant whence hewn they are, and what the limitation means, whereon one thriveth well, if one go not astray.
End of Paradiso, Canto 11. Section 79 of the Divine Comedy by Dante Alighieri, translated by Courtney Langdon. This Librivox recording is in the public domain. Paradiso, Canto 12. The Fourth Heaven. The Sun. Intellectual Happiness. The Spirits of Theologians and Philosophers. Saint Dominic.
As soon as ere the blessed flame had voiced its final word, the holy wheel began to whirl, and in its circling had not moved around completely, ere another wheel enclosed it in a ring, and each to each matched with its own its motions and its songs. Songs which, in those sweet pipes, as far surpass our muses and our sirens, as a primal splendour surpasses one reflected from it. As when, both parallel and like in hue, 2 rainbows o'er a tender cloud are drawn, when Juno issues orders to her maid, the outer being from the inner born, as is the speaking of that wandering nymph whom love consumed, as mists are by the sun. And coarse folk hear, by reason of the pact which God with Noah made, to prophesy about the world, that it will not again be flooded. So of those eternal roses the 2 wreaths turned around us there, and so the outer with the inmost harmonized. After the dance and great high feast of song, and flaming interplay of light with light, in joyful happiness and tender love, had of a sudden and with one accord grown quiet, even as eyes do, which must close and open at the will of what attracts them. Out of the heart of one of those new lights a voice came forth, as to its where I turned, which made me seem a needle to its star. And it began,
The love which lends me beauty draws me to talk about that other leader, for whose sake mine is so well talked of here. Where one is, right it is to introduce the other, so that, since they fought together, their glories likewise may together shine. Christ's host, which cost so much to arm anew, was slowly, timidly, and small in numbers moving behind its standard, when the emperor, who ever reigns, provided of his grace alone for his endangered host, and not because of its deserts, and helped his bride, as it hath here been said, with champions 2, through whom, because of what they did and said, the people who had strayed away returned. In those parts where sweet Zephyr's breezes rise to open springtime's foliage, wherewithal Europe is seen to clothe herself again, not very distant from the beating waves, behind which, through his long career, the sun conceals himself at times from every one. Fortunate Caloroga hath her seat, guarded by that great shield, in which the lion both subjugates and is subdued. Therein the amorous lover of the Christian faith was born, the holy athlete, well disposed toward those he loved, and toward his foes severe. And even at its creation was his mind with such live virtue filled, that in his mother it caused her to become a prophetess. After the spousal tween the faith and him had at the sacred font been held, where each with mutual health had dowered each, the lady who answered for him in a dream beheld the wondrous fruit that was to come from him and from his heirs. And that he might by name be what he was, a spirit went from hence to give him the possessive of the one who wholly owned him. Dominic he was called, and of him as the husbandman I speak, whom Christ to help him in his garden chose. He truly seemed Christ's messenger and servant, because the first love which appeared in him was for the primal counsel given by Christ. Often was he discovered by his nurse lying awake and silent on the ground, as if he meant thereby, I came for this. Oh, Felix, of a truth his father was. Oh, truly Joan his mother, if it mean what it is said to, when interpreted. Not for the world's sake for which men now toil, following the men of Ostia and Taddeo, but for the love of spirit food. So great a teacher did he shortly make himself, that he began to go about the vineyard, which withers soon, if idle be the vintner. And of the chair, which to the righteous poor was formerly more kind, not through its own, but through the fault of him who, sitting there, degenerates, he asked not for the right to give or 2 or 3 for 6, nor yet the income of the earliest vacancy, nor even the tithes which to God's poor belong, but leave to fight against the erring world for that seed's sake, whereof plants 24 are girding thee. With doctrine thereupon and will to apostolic sanction joined, he started like a torrent by a high source urged, and on all stocks heretical his onset smote. And ever there most strongly, where strongest the resistance was. From him there afterward flowed diverse streams, wherewith the garden Catholic is watered so, that all the fresher are its tender shrubs. If such was one wheel of the car, whereby the Holy Church, herself defending, won the civil struggle in her own domain, the other's excellence should certainly be very plain to thee, concerning whom Thomas so courteous was, ere I appeared. And yet the rut, formed by the highest part of its circumference, so forsaken is, that there where crust was now is mould. His household, which started out aright, and kept their feet upon his footprints, hath so turned around, that that which is in front now treads on what was once behind. And this will soon be seen by the bad culture's harvest, when the tares will, of their loss of granaries, complain. And yet I say that one who, page by page, should search our book, would still some paper find where he could read, What I was wont to be, I am. But from Casale he'll not come, nor yet from Aquasparta, whence such men approach the rule, that one evades and one contracts its scope. Bonaventura's life am I, of Bagnoregio, who in great positions set sinister cares behind. Here are Illuminato and Augustine, who were among the first barefooted poor, and, courted, made themselves the friends of God. Hugh of St. Victor here among them is, and Peter Manjador, and Peter of Spain, who in a dozen books still shines on earth. Nathan the prophet, and Metropolitan Chrysostom, Anselm, ay, and that Donatus, who to the first art deigned to set his hand. Rabban is here, and at my side is shining the abbot of Calabria, Joachim, who with prophetic spirit was endowed. The flaming courtesy of brother Thomas and his discerning speech have moved me thus to celebrate so great a paladin, and with me likewise moved this company.
End of Paradiso, Canto 12.